You'll have to forgive me, this is my first ever post, so if I'm a bit slow, yeah, that's the reason why. Getting quite serious about my tank now. Just last couple of years started building this tank up, planning it out, researching on the internet, found out you can make your own homemade CO2 system, so I thought about time to get a bit geeky on the subject and have a bash at myself, quite hands-on. So after many hours researching around on the internet, reading many stories about homemade CO2 storage bottles exploding, glass and plastic, believe it or not, I thought I'd go for these more sturdy pressure garden sprayers. You just standard garden pressure sprayers. And these ones are quite handy. These actually have a pressure release valve there, so extra backup there. You know, I expect the old yeast solution goes quite a way under pressure if the bottle explodes. So also whilst wandering around the shop, those were 99p by the way, absolute bargain. Also wandering around the shops, I noticed they had these cheapy plastic tyre pressure gauges. So I thought that was quite a good idea. Just a little 10mm hole in the top of the bottle and glued these gauges in. At least you can see you're running some sort of pressure in the bottle. These have only had a couple of hours brewing, so I mean I've actually had it up to 25 psi, so it can hold quite a pressure. Yeah, I mean with the standard cola bottle you can't see what pressure, only just by feeling the bottle. I mean it gets pretty tight. I did brew a yeast solution up in a bottle and got a bit scared leaving it, so decided to go for these instead. Yeah, I got a standard 4mm airline nipple there, straight nipple going into the brass spray nose. That was quite simple, just drill out the nose, 4mm drill, pretty simple. Brass is quite soft, so I've got two bottles teeing into one line, into just your standard pressure regulator there, then into a check valve. Not too sure about the position of this valve yet. I noticed, I'm not too sure whether it should go here or at the end of the bottle here, because when I pressed the trigger down on the two bottles, I noticed that the pressure regulator, they discharged and leveled out the pressures in between the two bottles, with the regulator being the check valve being here. Not too sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, so maybe some modification to come yet. So that's down there. If I move up to the tank, you can see my CO2 reactor here, probably only about 6 inches tall. I didn't want a big reactor. You know, I'm not into it enough to understand if I'm actually getting enough CO2 into the tank, but I figured any CO2 is better than none for the plants. So at the back there, you can see I've got a little Interpet pump. It was the smallest one I could find in the shop, but it was quite handy actually. I think it was about 80 quid, but it came with this little black spray bar there, so I managed to find a use for it. That's directed up to my pump outlet up the top there, so that's quite handy. Yeah, so the CO2 comes down that blue tube there, you can see, and at the moment, I don't know if I've changed this yet, but I've actually got the CO2 being injected into the filter housing of the pump. So the CO2 bubbles actually go into the impeller of the pump, get mashed up before being pumped through to the top of the CO2 reactor. So I've slightly offset the inlet on the CO2 reactor from the pump to give me a vortex of bubbles there, and that actually works quite well. A big wishy-washy effect of bubbles. Don't know if you can see them on this camera, it's pretty rubbish. But the bubbles go round and round and round and get smaller the closer to the bottom they get, and actually go up that grey tube. It's about 10mm, absolutely perfect size, just found in my shed, straight up into what was the top of the gravel cleaner, out up the tubes and out the spray bar. Not getting 100% diffusion, but certainly getting close to that, I imagine. Probably 60 or 70%. I mean, the bubbles start off relatively large at the top and don't completely disappear, but seeing hardly anything come out of the little spray bar there. And like I said, that's pointing up to my pump outlet, which fires the CO2 injected water all around the tank. So like I said, that was my first post. Keep watching, and you never know, I may update the system or may post results of this one.